reading from the Holy Gospel, the good news according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from this world and to go to the Father. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the very end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas to betray him. And so, during supper, Jesus got up from the table. He took off his outer garments. He took a towel, tied it round his waist. Then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet, and to dry them with the towel around his waist. He then came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered and said, "What I'm doing now you do not understand, but you will understand later." And Peter said to him, "Never, you shall never wash my feet." And Jesus said, "Unless I wash you, you cannot be my disciple." And Peter said, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." And after he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table, Jesus said to them, "Now do you realize what I've just done for you? You call me teacher and Lord and master, and you're right, that's what I am. So if I, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you also are to wash one another's feet. For I have just given you an example, a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you also should do." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
If you were here on Sunday night, I spent a little time talking about some of those images of God, and I said that, you know, from the book of Genesis, we're all created and made in God's image and likeness, right? I said that. So I arrived here, you know, Friday, and today's the last day. I have to leave tomorrow. But living in the house there with Father Rossi and Father David, I got to tell you this. I saw those guys in the morning before they had their showers and, you know, brushed their copious amounts of hair and trimmed their ears, you know. It wasn't a pretty sight. But I believe that they're made in the image and likeness of God. Father Rossi and I went over to the, what was the name of the school again?
Portsmouth Catholic.
Portsmouth Catholic. Wonderful little school. We went over, we had Mass, and we had all the kids there. And I'll share this story. This didn't happen there, but it happened a couple of years ago. Whenever I deal with the kids, I had this story in my head. I was in a parish, and I stayed there for Easter. And of course, as you realize, you know, everybody goes to church at Easter. So this particular parish, they had all the kids come up, you see, and then I gave them a blessing, and off they went to be instructed in their own language, you know, their own concepts and so on. And then they came back just before the offertory, and then they were all sitting around the sanctuary. So now imagine, now it's Easter Sunday, the church is packed. So I decided I'd have a little chat with the kids. So I said, "Today's a very special day, Easter Sunday. It's got nothing to do with the Easter Bunny. What is it that we're celebrating today?" And of course the kids were all prepared and they knew. They said, "This is the day that Jesus rose from the dead." I said, "Absolutely right." Now I should have stopped there, but I didn't. So I continued on and I said, "So, right, this is the day that Jesus rose from the dead." I said, "Can anybody tell me, what did Jesus say Easter Sunday morning when he came out of the tomb?" Does anybody know? And I can see all the kids going, I can see some of the parents go, "Gee, did he say anything? What did he say?" I don't know. I said, "Surely someone can tell me what Jesus said Easter Sunday morning when he came out of the tomb." And there was this little girl, she put her hand up. I said, "Do you know?" She said, "I think so." I said, "Good, come up here, stand by me. Tell all these people what Jesus said when he came out of the tomb Easter Sunday morning." So she looked at me. I said, "Go ahead, tell them, tell them." And this beautiful, bright little angel of a girl girl said this. She looked at the people and she went, ta-da! What else is there to say? Whatever I had planned as a homily, forget it. The mind of a child. So here's what I want to talk to you tonight about. I want to talk to you about the Eucharist and discipleship. Okay, two important things. Our church is based on the Eucharist. If we didn't have the Eucharist, we'd have very little, if nothing, really. So the society that Jesus lived in, of course, was neatly divided up into groups of people. You had the upper class, the middle class, low class, and then you had a class that was even lower than the lowest, bottom. Who were in that class? A lot of people. You had people who had unclean professions, tax collectors, shepherds. They were in the lowest of the low. And believe it or not, women had basically no rights. They were considered lowest of the low. And then you had that group of people. They weren't really considered people. They were things. They had slaves. You could buy, you could sell a slave. Now, the country that Jesus lived in, and I've been over there, it's warm, desert-like. You know, most of the people didn't have shoes like our shoes or sneakers. They walked around, if they were lucky enough to have sandals, but most people walked around with their bare feet. Imagine what your feet will be like today if you walked around town all day long with your bare feet. At the end of the day, what would your feet be like? They'd be sore. You may have cut your toes on something. Your feet would smell. Today, when you come into someone's house as a visitor, our custom is we shake the person's hand. You say, come on in, good to see you. Or we give them a hug. Come on in, sit down. The time of Jesus, custom among the upper and middle class, you'd come into someone's house, they would say to you, sit down. And then they would order their slave. You couldn't ask anybody to do this. This was a dirty job. They would order their slave to get water poured on your feet, the visitor's feet. That was a sign of welcome, sign of hospitality. For 3 years, Jesus is going around and he's talking about the reign of God, not the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is something that we'll get hopefully when we die. But Jesus was talking about a reign of God that exists here and now. For 3 years, his own disciples didn't get the message. You know, it went in one ear, picked up speed, out the other. Their headbands were just on a bit too tight. So Jesus, I'm sure, was very frustrated. So the gospel and the reading that you listen to this evening is the same reading that you hear every Holy Thursday. It never changes. So what happens? I imagine Jesus sitting at the table and he said to himself, you know, I've been talking about this for 3 years. They don't get it. Maybe if I show them, maybe if they see with their eyes, maybe then they'll get it. So what does Jesus do? He gets up from the table, he takes off his outer garment, he gets water, pours it into a basin, and what does he do? He gets on his hands and knees and he goes around the table and he starts to wash their feet, which is the dirty job of a slave. And Peter sees what's happening first and he said, what are you doing, Jesus? Don't do that. I believe that you're the Son of God. Don't, please, no. That's too humiliating, too degrading. Stand up. I will not let you wash my feet. And Peter says that. I'm sure he said, look, I don't want Jesus to wash my feet. That's the dirty job of a slave. And Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, if you won't let me wash your feet, you can't be a disciple. So Jesus washes all their feet, goes back, puts his garment back on, and then he says, now do you get it? Do you see what I've been talking about? I'm your Lord, your master, your teacher. If I can get down on my hands and knees and do the dirtiest of jobs, like wash your feet, you want to follow me? You want to be called a disciple of mine? Then you have got to wash each other's feet. I have just given you a model, an example, to do to others what I've done to you. Now, how are we going to do that? We're called to wash feet. Does Jesus expect us to literally go around every day with water in a basin? I don't think so. So how else are we going to understand this washing of feet? Let's use a word that we use maybe too much. The word love. We overuse it. I love that book, love that movie, love that meal, love that dress, love that car, and I love you. It's the same word, but we use it all the time. Love, 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 love. In the sense, though, of washing feet, the word love means that we do things for others out of that motive of love. Never because we want something in return. I do these things for you. I love you because I love you. Not because I want to be thanked or recognized or rewarded. You know, a lot of people do things for others for the wrong reasons. You do things and you're never recognized. What happens? They end up becoming martyrs. And I know an awful lot of people who are martyrs. And this is how they talk. After all I've done for them, the ungrateful so-and-sos. I've worked my little fingers to the bone. For what? Nothing. No thanks, not a word of recognition. God knows what I've done for him or for her. That's not a washer. That's a martyr. There's a lot of martyrs around. And you do it all the time. You wash each other's feet in little ways. Think about this. You do it all the time, every day. You pick up the phone and maybe spend 10 or 15 minutes talking to someone that you think might need to hear a happy, cheerful voice. How are you today? Just thought I'd give you a call. Or when the phone rings and you answer it and you're on the other end of the line for an hour and a half, every major organ in their body is collapsing. It's a major organ recital. But you don't hang up, but you listen. You're washing that person's feet. When you visit someone in the hospital, visit someone in the nursing home, offer to babysit someone's children free of charge so they can go and do what they have to do. All these little things that we do for one another every day is washing feet. But it's got to be done out of the motive of love. Never because I want to be thanked. Now, there's a second way of washing feet. And this is a wonderful place for me to say this. This is a beautiful church building. Now, God forbid, we hope and pray, but you know what? It could burn to the ground tonight. We hope and pray that it doesn't. But you know what? It's a building. It's not the church. This is a building. Brick, stone, glass. Now, we as people, we attach sentiments to buildings, do we not? Whether it be here in this, resurrection, whether it be, St. Paul's, whether it be St. Mary's. I love that parish. Why? Well, I was married there. So I have an affection for that building, that parish. Why do you like this place? Well, my kids were baptized there. Why do you like that place? Well, my parents were buried from there. As human beings, we attach sentiments to buildings, and that's a wonderful thing. But we have big problems today. The problem is this: fewer and fewer of you sitting in the seats, and fewer of us. And as a result, painful choices are made all the time. It's always emotional, it's always painful, there's a great deal of anger and so on, when decisions are made to close a building. Close a building. But the building is just a building. It's not the church. We, the living, breathing members who gather in a building, we are the church, not the building. I mean, you have a cluster of 4 parishes here. You've got 2 priests. I was doing a mission for another young priest. Guess how many buildings, church buildings, he had to service on a weekend? 7. You can't do that. You can't expect that young man to run around every weekend to 7 buildings. Eventually, that young man will become either depressed, become an alcoholic, and just throw it all in. And say, can't do it. It's not possible. And even physically and even financially, it's not possible. So, things, have to be really understood that the buildings are just buildings. It's the people that are the church. And so each time that we gather as church in a building, we also have people who volunteer to wash our feet. We use a churchy word, it's called ministry. Think about this. Every time we gather, whether it be each night here of the mission or on a Sunday, we have people who will get out of those seats, come up and sit over there and sing their little hearts out. They're washing our feet. They're ministering to us. People who get out of the seat come up and read and proclaim the Word of God. They're washing our feet. People who serve at the altar, washing our feet. People who help distribute communion, they're washing our feet. The people who came early and stayed late each night after we left to clean up our mess in the hall, were washing our feet. But all those things that we do have to be done for that reason. Not because we want people to say, aren't I wonderful? Look at what I'm doing for you. No, no. We're doing this ministry, this washing of feet, out of love. But there's a third way of washing feet. This is the one I think is most important. Now again, I recognize that Sunday night until tonight, I've told you some pretty terrible stories, right? I know. And this dullness of brain, because I wasn't a bright student in school. I mean, I had to work for everything I got. I didn't flunk anything, but it just got by. And this dullness of brain continued from grade school, high school, university, and even into the seminary. When I got to the seminary, I had some fantastic questions to ask about the Bible. I'll give you an example. I'd sit there and I'd say, Father, I have a question about the Bible. What is it? I said, well, I was reading the book of Genesis, and it said that God created Adam, the male, and called him a man, right? Yeah. I said, then it says God created Eve, the female, and called her a woman, right? Yeah. He said, what's your question? I said, well, my question is simple. We have a man, and we have a woman. Why do we put woe in front of man? We have a man. Would that not keep you awake at night thinking? We got a man and a woman. They never answered the question. So I had to come up with my own answer, okay? So here it is. So after I read that in Scripture, this is what I determined. God created Adam, the male, called him a man. God took one look at this man and said he needs a lot of help. So God put the man into a deep sleep. While the man was asleep, God took one of his ribs, he enclosed the man's rib with flesh, and God created the female. You follow me so far? And then I believe when God created the female, God stood back, looked at the female, and said, whoa, man. Bible, I know that. But that makes more sense to me. But actually, what I've learned since is that the word woe means taken from. But I didn't hear that. And here's the thing, you know, I mean, Father Rossi's ordained 4 months. 4 months is it? Roughly 4 months. How many were ordained in the same class? I forget how many told me.
Like 12.
12. Wow. In my group, every new group of priests that were ordained, you had your class picture taken, right? And then your photo, and then your name under your photo, and then there was a quote from the Bible that went on the class picture that best described that new group of priests. Well, my class, we couldn't find a quote. So I was asked to go to the scripture teacher and see if he could find one. He said, you need a quote for the picture? I said, yes. He says, for your class? Absolutely. He said, I have the quote. He took a piece of paper, wrote down. I said, fantastic, Father, thank you. Called my classmates together. I said, quick, someone get a Bible. I've got the quote that's going on the class picture. We get the Bible, flip through the pages, we find it. 3 words, 3 little words. And Jesus wept. I didn't think that was funny at all. But I had this goal that I was going to be ordained. So anyway, I reached my goal, 20th of May, 1972, a long time ago. 2 weeks a priest. Okay? My boss came to me and said, this is highly unusual, but we're stuck. He said, what do you mean you're stuck? He said, well, we're stuck. We have to send a priest to a parish for 5 weeks. You're the only one available. We've got no one else to send but you. You're only ordained 2 weeks. I said, not a problem, I'll go. And it was amazing. You know, there I was finally unleashed on an unsuspecting world. Nobody looking over my shoulder. And there was a hospital in the parish. Oh, this was great, because what I had to do was to go around and get all the names of all the Catholics in there who were sick and visit them. Right? Oh, this was amazing. I just had a flashback. About 6 or 7 years later, I became a pastor. And I had a lot of experience by then, hopefully. And there was a hospital in my parish, too. And I was visiting, and I was quite surprised to see that one of my parishioners was still in the hospital. I thought that she had gone in, had her baby, and was gone home. But there she was still there. So here's the situation. So I went into her room. I said, Mary, you're still here. She said, yes, and I'm none too thrilled about it either. I said, what's happening? She said, nothing's happening. I'm overdue. Baby's not moving. She said, I'm overdue. Nothing's happening. I said, wow. I said, was the doctor in to see you? She said, the doctor just left. And I said to her, what did the doctor say? This is what she said to me. She said, the doctor said if nothing happens tonight, he's going to seduce me in the morning. What she meant. Anyway, to get back to my story. 2 weeks a priest, and there was a hospital in this parish too. So I had to go up, and I went up to the maternity floor, right? And I said to this lady, did you have your baby? Yes, Father. Baby boy or girl? Baby boy. How much did he weigh? 7 pounds. A big baby. And I remember saying to this woman, I said, you know, they tell me that when I was born, I was premature. And that I weighed a grand total of 3 pounds. And my mother, God rest her soul, she died in 1996. My mother did not eat chicken. She hated chicken with a passion. And I remember saying to her one day, I said, Mom, how come you don't like chicken? Oh, she said, that's easy. She said, when you were born and I took one look at you, she said, you put me off chicken forever. Than a Cornish hen. So I gave this lady a blessing, and I go over to this other lady, and I said, how are you? She said, oh, I'm nervous, Father. I said, why? She said, this is my first pregnancy. I turned to her, and I said to her, nothing to it. Then I gave her a blessing, and I went home, put my feet up, and I said, boy, this priest stuff is easy. Now, if you've been following the story takes a turn. So later on that night, I get a phone call from the hospital, and this nurse said, Father, you visited someone earlier on today, and it was this young, first-time expectant mother, and she told me, I said, yes, I remember being in there. She said, well, she did finally give birth. She gave birth to a baby boy, but the child, the infant, struggled to breathe. There's something wrong with his lungs. She said the baby didn't make it. She said the baby died. She'd like to see you again. So now, I'm driving down to the hospital, and I'm saying to myself as I'm driving down, you weren't the sharpest knife in the drawer in the seminary, that's for sure. You don't know a whole lot about the Bible, just enough to fool a lot of people, right? There's so many unwanted children in this world. Here's a child that was going to be wanted, needed, loved. What are you going to say to this woman? So I went into the room. It was very dark, very quiet. And I went over to her and I said, look, I said, first of all, I have to apologize to you. She said, for what? I said, well, when I saw you earlier on today and you told me you were nervous about this pregnancy, I said, I didn't hear that. Secondly, I got to tell you that I'm just brand new with this priest stuff. I said, I really don't know what to say. And I'll never forget what this wonderful, beautiful mother said to me. She said, Father, don't think that you got to stand there and say anything. Don't think that you got to try to give me an answer. You can't give me an answer. Don't stand there and try to give me an explanation as to what happened. You can't do that. She said, I don't need it. I don't want it. The only thing that I want, the only thing that I need is to have someone here with me now. And I thank God for giving me that experience, 2 weeks as a priest. Because I believe that the greatest moments when we can wash the feet of another human being are precisely those moments when you feel most useless. Can't say anything, can't do anything, you can't kiss everything and make it all better. Maybe the only thing and the hardest thing for us to do is to be there. And for some people, unfortunately, even being there is not easy. I'm not home a lot. A couple of years ago, this lady came into my office, plunked herself down in the chair, and she said, well, she said, I really don't know why I'm here. I said, well, there's got to be a reason. Yeah, she said, there's a reason, but I don't know why I'm here. So I said, well, what's going on? She said, well, she said, I was just walking past the church. And she said, I have a son, and he's dying of AIDS. And she said, I know the church's views on homosexuality. She said, but I had this crazy thought that I would just go into the church and maybe find a priest, see if one of you priests would go and visit my son in the hospital. So I said, you got me, right? She said, yeah. Would you go and visit him? I said, absolutely. So the next day I went down to the hospital and I found the room. I opened up the door, and there on this bed was this very, very sick young man. And sitting on the bed with him was his mother. And she was just holding his head in her arms, and she was just wiping his brow. The image that I saw, as soon as I saw that, was the image of the Pietà, of Mary cradling her dead son when he was taken down from the cross. No words were exchanged between the mother and the son. No words were necessary. Who knows what that mother might have thought about her son's lifestyle? And it might have been very easy for that mother not to have been there at all. But where was she? There she was. Not saying a word. But she was washing feet. Now, you know, over the years, a lot of people have said to me, you know, Father, I don't bother going to Mass a lot. And I say, why not? And you hear this all the time. It's boring. Every Sunday it's the same old thing. I find it, I'm there out of a sense of guilt or obligation. It's an empty ritual, an obligation, and something to be done quickly and gotten over with. And my response to people who tell me that is very simple. I say to them, you're absolutely right. Our Mass, our Eucharist can become an empty ritual, an obligation, something to be done quickly and gotten over with. Now, greater minds than mine might be able, I'm sure they would, be able to explain the Eucharist in wonderful terms that you might understand. Wonderful, flowing theological terms. I'm not able to do that. I wouldn't even attempt it. What I'm going to try to do now is to give you how I understand what happens up here. All right? The church uses this example. And remember, even though I'm not married, I don't have that experience of being married. But working with couples, listening to married couples, those who are married, separated, divorced, remarried, certain things I've learned to be true. Now, it can be the husband or it can be the wife. It can be either or. It's not always one or the other. But for tonight's presentation, let me choose the husband. In a marriage relationship, if from 8 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, if during that whole day, that man, that husband, has not gone near his wife to give her a hug, nothing. From 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, he doesn't go near that woman, he doesn't put his arms around her to give her a hug or a kiss, nothing. No sign of love from that man. No sign of affection all day long. She's there, but she's ignored, just taken for granted, expected to be there. No sign of love from that man towards that wife. What happens when it comes time to go to bed at 11 o'clock at night, perhaps? That same man, that husband who has ignored that woman all day long, he expects her to be miraculously changed into a very exciting sexual partner. It doesn't happen, I'm told. Because even there, the very act of making love can become what? An obligation, an empty ritual, something to be done quickly and gotten over with. Again, I'm not married, but married couples have told me this. Lovemaking does not really start or begin in the bedroom. It has to have started long before we ever get there. And if that's true, which I believe it is, then the little light was on in my brain. The Eucharist, the Mass, does not begin the minute we walk in the doors of this building. The Eucharist has to have started long before we ever get here. If there has been no washing of feet on your part, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, no act of loving on your part towards other people, how in the name of God do we expect anything exciting, worthwhile to take place here for 45 minutes or an hour on Sunday? And that's why for many people it's empty, sterile, an obligation. I got to be out of here quickly. The Eucharist doesn't start the minute you got here. It has to have started long before that. So, in my mind, what happens up here, it's not a big mystery. This too is an act of love. It is perhaps the greatest sign of love. It's this person, Jesus, giving himself totally to you and to me, to the point of dying. The greatest sign of love our world has ever known. Jesus freely giving himself totally to death for you and for me. And each time we gather as church, what happens? At a certain point, you're invited to get out of the seat, come up here. And we're standing in front of what? You're standing in front of a God in the person of Jesus. At that point, it's no longer a little wafer of bread. This is Jesus. And we're standing there and we look down. And Jesus is there in front of you and me on his hands and knees with water and a basin. And he looks up at you and me and he says, will you let me wash your feet? Will you let me wash the pain from your life? The bad memories, the bad choices, the things that you just haunt you at night. Will you let me wash that away? Will you let me wash the dirt from your life? And if we say yes, amen, we put our hand up, then at that moment, Jesus says, now, you can't stay here. Maybe during the mission, with this fellow O'Reilly, you had a few laughs. Maybe you heard a few things in a different way. But you can't stay here. You've got to leave this building, go back out there, and you've got to wash feet. You can't do it on your own, he says. I'm the vine, you are the branches. I will give you the strength you need to love him and to love her. He said, there may be members of your own families, that you find it hard to get along with. He said, I'm going to give you the strength to love them, to wash their feet. There may be people at work that drive you up one wall and down the other. You've got to wash their feet too. You can't do it on your own. So you see, the mission does not end this evening. Formally, yes. But the mission has to continue in a very real way. Every time we gather around this Eucharistic table, as long as there are empty places around our Eucharistic table, the mission goes on. If there are people in these parishes, communities that feel that they don't belong here, the mission goes on. If there are people who feel that they're not welcomed, that they're not even missed. When was the last time someone said, gee, where were you last week? We missed you. We didn't see you here. As long as there are empty places around our Eucharistic tables, the mission goes on. And that's the hope and prayer of this mission. That one day, when all is said and done, that you and me will be reunited again in another kingdom, around another table, and we'll all hear from the lips of Jesus, who will say to you and to me, well done, good and faithful disciple. Come on in. Take the place that has your name on it, the place that has been prepared for you since the beginning of time. That's the hope and prayer of the mission. So now I'm going to invite you to stand, and we're going to express our prayers for ourselves, for our church, and our world.